Hi, we're continuing our study on Christians and the Hebrew Old Covenant law and whether we should be keeping feasts and holy days from the Old Covenant in a New Covenant lifestyle. And I want to go to Galatians chapter 3, verse 23 to begin right now. Paul, referring to Israelites that were in the church, fleshly born Israelites, contrasted from the Gentiles that were in the church, says, before faith came, we, you've got to notice the difference between we and you. He says we, referring to himself and other Jews that were in the church, as opposed to the Gentiles that before Jesus never were under law like Israel was. Before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up under the faith which should afterward be revealed. Wherefore, the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. We are no longer under a schoolmaster. So after faith arrives, Israel is no longer under tutors and governors. Notice he's talking about law as a schoolmaster in chapter 3. And then when you go to chapter 4, he brings a parable out to explain what he's trying to say. And he just called law a schoolmaster. So with that in mind, he says, the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant. So he's talking about an heir while he's a child and a servant. And just picture a big, fancy, wealthy mansion. And you got rich people living in it, and there's kids in that family that are heirs to that fortune, but there are also servants there. And so that heir, as long as he's a child, is the same thing as a servant, but he's under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Now, what did he just say about schooling and schoolmastery? He said the law was our schoolmaster. He continues that into chapter 4. And he says the Jew, as a young child, is no different from a servant. And the servant is speaking about the Gentiles. But the heir is under tutors and governors, the schoolmaster of the law, until the time appointed of the Father. And we know it's talking about Israelites because he says again, he uses the word we Israelites that are in the church. Even so, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. And people say, see, that's paganism. That's paganism. It's elements of the world. The Hebrew Old Testament wasn't of the world. No, wait a minute. He's talking about bondage here, and he's not using elements the way you think he is. Element is the root word of elementary, as in elementary school. He's talking about the law being a schoolmaster. He's talking about the Jews before Jesus came with the New Testament, the New Covenant. They were like children under the law schoolmaster. And the time appointed of the Father is when Jesus comes with the New Covenant. So this is talking about the time before Jesus ever came to Israel. They're under tutors and governors. And the Bible tells us that the law was to bring them to Jesus Christ. And that's mentioned in chapter 3. The law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ. So before Jesus came, God had Israel go under 15 centuries of law, because it was teaching them something. It was a schoolmaster. Just like chapter 4 says that those Jews that were in the church, distinct from the Gentiles that were saved, were under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. We were children under bondage of the elements of the world. We were in elementary school. And the bondage, he says, is what you see in chapter 3 when it tells you that they were kept under the law. They were shut up. Those words are words signifying bondage. Look it up. When it tells us what time? The time appointed of the Father, when they would no longer be under tutors and governors. They would no longer be under a law schoolmaster. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And see, now he's saying we, because he's not only including Jews here, he's including the Gentiles. And then he says you, referring to the Gentiles in the church, because you are sons. This is what God did with us. We were under tutors and governors. We were heirs. We were kids of the wealthy people that had the mansion. We had a great promise coming. Jesus Christ in the new covenant was that wealth, was that inheritance. And he said, when the fullness of time was come, we were redeemed from under the law. But you, your sons too, you Gentiles. And God sent the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. You came into this like we were born into it. And so you are no more a servant. Thou art no, see, here we go. He says you, when he refers to servants, he says we, when he refers to heirs, the heir. And when we were children, like heirs, we were in elementary school. And he says it's of the world because the laws, commandments contained in ordinances, which was the middle wall of partition that came down, they were all physical rituals you had to physically carry out. So it was not of the world in the sense that the world was evil, but it's things that you could touch physically, rituals. You can't actually pick up a stick of wood on the Sabbath that you're going to use for fire, lest you be stoned, that type of thing. And so now he's showing us that you are the servants when he speaks to Gentiles. We are the heirs when he speaks to Jews. But every one of us, we were redeemed from under the law, he says, and you are no more a servant. You're a son. And if you're a son, then here we go. Just like us, you are now an heir of God through Christ. That's what Ephesians chapter 2 is trying to tell us, that the Gentiles were on the other side of the wall of partition, and they were brought close when that wall came down, and they were made part of the Israel and commonwealth of God. Just like here, we're reading, you are no more servants. You're just like us now. You're heirs. But when you knew not God, before you came to Jesus, you did service unto them which are by nature no gods. There's the idols. There's the paganism. But now, after that you have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn you again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire again to be in bondage? Now, the Jews were the ones that were under the beggarly elements of the world. The elements of the world refers to elementary school law. And notice it says bondage. And like we said, go down to the end of the chapter. And he says, you people that want to be under the law, in verse 21, don't you know that the old covenant, the one that was from Mount Sinai, genders to bondage? The bondage, if you're going to be consistent in this chapter and not jump from one thing to another, the bondage here is law. So then why does he say around verse 9 that you are turning again, you Gentiles? Wasn't it the Jews that were under elementary school, if elementary school is referring to the law? Wasn't it the Jews? So why is he saying to the Gentiles, the you people, the ye, that distinguishes the Gentiles in the church from Paul and the other Jews in the church? Again, you're turning again to beggarly elements. You see, what it is they were servants. You did service to them, which by nature are no gods. They were serving idols. They were in a bondage. Now, Israel was in another form of bondage, and that's the key. They were kept shut up from the faith, under the law, under the schoolmaster. But the Gentiles were doing service and in bondage to them, which by nature are no gods. So they were trading one form of bondage to idols to another form of bondage to law keeping, when these Gentiles in the church were being persuaded by Judaizers to keep the law, to make sure they're circumcised and so forth and so on. And then he says, you observe days and months and times and years. So the days and months and times and years, people will say, well, that's going back to verse 8. It's Gentiles serving that which is by nature no gods. They aren't really gods. That's what he's for. Pagan holidays, pagan months, pagan. No. He just established the fact that the beggarly elements are the law, because he says we were in bondage under the elements of the world. The tutors and the governors in verse 2 are the elements of the world in verse 3, and the tutors and governors in verse 2 are the law and the schoolmastery of chapter 3. See what he's saying? So that's established that that's law. So what he's saying is, you Gentiles in the church, you are going from a form of bondage to idols to the form of bondage that we were kept under. We were shut up under when we were under the schoolmaster called law. And again, he proves that when he says it flat out, outrightly in verse 24. The old covenant, the one that's from Mount Sinai, genders to bondage.